We're rolling, Gene. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Glad to be here.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
I just read your book, very much enjoyed it, and thank you for writing it. And we can start wherever you want if you want to talk a little bit about the book, and then I'll start picking your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was definitely a passion project to do that. It, uh, it was something I've always wanted to do. And I feel like I was led to do that, just to take this knowledge base that I've developed over the years and make something that's actually, that's why I call it a tactical guide, because I wanted it to be something that people could actually take and use and make a difference in their life. I coach, so I have a business around these principles, and I coach my clients, my friends, that I would rather they take one book a year and actually implement the strategies in that book and make a difference in their life and others, than to read 10 books a year and never do anything different as a result of reading those books. I think a lot of people are, really good about reading, and or listening to books, on audio, but they just go from book to book and never actually implement any of those ideas. So I wanted it to be that. And, yeah, it's been a blessing. It's surprising to me, as we were talking a little bit beforehand, how I thought when you wrote the book that that would be the hard part. And what I found after doing it was that was actually the easy part. It takes discipline, it takes time to get your thoughts in order, but the editing, the cover design, the reading the audible part of it, which listening to yourself for for 16 hours, 20 hours to record that is kind of quite the experience, I guess, is the way I would put it. But it's, all of that stuff that goes into it. So people look at books on the shelf, like I tell you're an avid reader, you have a lot of books here, but to think of what went into those books, and actually, the energy in each one of those books is fascinating. And like we talked about, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt said it, that with best, that the best books in life are on the top shelf. And to reach those books, you have to stack up the other books that you've read through the years. And I just think that's really a fascinating way to look at it, because as we get older and grow older and get, more wisdom, I hope, those things become more and more important. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was quite the endeavor.
And thank you for reading the book. It's when you say the books have an energy to them, to listen to the audio book, to hear your voice and know you live those experiences and you live these principles. There's a big difference. And I can only imagine, because a lot of this is off the cuff. Just a few, I have like an outro that I've read for this and a few things that I'll put in here just to get that minute right, to read it right and
Yeah.
to have every word come out right and not stumble over everything. I'd imagine it's a lot of retakes and
It's fascinating, actually. So I found a gal there again. That's part of this process that I had no idea. I found a gal in New York City that trains actors, singing and speaking voices, and she was fascinating. And but I didn't have time to go to New York City. It would have been great to do that and go to her studio and do that. But anyhow, I had to do kind of a hybrid model where I used a studio in Scottsdale where we go in the wintertime. And so they had the mixing capabilities, they had the sound booth, all that stuff. And then Danielle would tap in with some of um, the principles and how to do it correctly. So it was quite comical in the beginning, and she was really good about bringing out, you know, my personality through the book. And so yeah, it was quite the experience. So it was annoying to listen to yourself for that many hours, but it was a great learning experience. And that, the same thing, any of those things that we do that kind of push us out of our comfort zone are so good for us in at so many different levels that it's really hard to measure. But that was one of those things.
yeah, my good friend of mine, Kyle, when we started in the podcast world over a couple years ago, that was our main goal was let's get better at communication, get better at talking to each other. And when you hear yourself back, in my opinion, you hear a lot of the unconscious things you say and do. And
Absolutely.
you see things that you maybe just heard and saw for the first time. And it's very interesting.
Yeah. Yep. So I'm curious how, and maybe you've told this story before, but I'm just really curious how you got involved in this, doing this, and I know some of the backstory, but yeah, it's because it takes a lot to do this. It's a big commitment to trying to book people and trying to get schedules coordinated, and I know you do it to bring the community together, and that's really honorable. But what kind of drove that in the beginning?
Yeah. So when me and my buddy Kyle started doing the podcast, I think the biggest thing that I've realized now in hindsight is, and you said it in your book, which I really appreciated, the secret to great communication is listening.
Yeah.
So I don't even have to worry about, am I talking perfect? Really, am I just asking good questions and listening? And it's amazing the conversations. The reason that what drove me to do it, and I realized all this in hindsight was, the transportation company I would drive clients around, and we'd spend enough time together, and we'd really get to know each other and talk. And as the company grew, I did less driving because I'm doing more managing, and it was really a desire to fill that same itch again, to have these conversations.
Right.
I've made some great friendships and relationships just from clients that I've driven around, and it's almost a blurry line. Are they a client, or are we friends now? Because
Ooh,
did I just invite one of them to one of my upcoming wedding, but I know them because they were a client.
sure.
So I think deep within, what drove it was just the curiosity to get to know people, to better understand myself, to get to know them better, and just realizing that we have so much more in common, even when we come from opposite sides of the world and totally opposite upbringings. But there's that deeper connection. So I think to answer your question is the desire to just build those relationships and get to know people. And I I look at it now in the way I've said it, and I'm still kind of voicing this to make it to get it to come out right. But for the company, is the way I look at it is we're storytellers. Like, all of me and all the drivers on the team, we're every time someone shows up in Montana, we're telling them a story about Montana.
Yeah.
How we treat people. You know what the airport looks like. It's a story. It looks like an art museum. It looks like a lodge, and this is just an extension of that storytelling. So I think that hopefully answers your question. But it's a desire, it's a curiosity and desire to know more about people and tell stories.
Yeah. Well, and like I say, it's not an easy thing to do. I think a lot of people, there are a lot of podcasts out there these days, and a lot of people just kind of, you know, uh, blow it off, if you will. That's everybody does it, but to do it right and to do it well and to do it with the proper intentions, it takes a lot of effort. So I commend you for doing that. What would be the most memorable trip that you've taken somebody on, or experience you've had while driving somebody around? Is there one thing that stands out? I'd be curious.
There's just one client I'm thinking of in particular, and shout out to Annette if she's listening. But she's a member up at the Yellowstone Club. She's from New Zealand. She's been a very successful businesswoman, very accomplished, and it's a long drive. That's an hour to an hour and a
Oh yeah.
half, and it was several times a year. Right around COVID, she couldn't leave the country during COVID, so she did a lot more here and stayed a lot longer than she normally would because she comes for ski season. But she's sent me and my fiance twice now to Tony Robbins
Oh wow.
because she's a Tony Robbins fan, and
That's huge.
we get talking about that, and you just think, man, we seem like we couldn't be more opposite. I grew up on a farm in upstate New York and gotten to know her more, and she had a pretty rough upbringing and overcame a lot and earned everything she has. And so it's not specific to one ride, but it's kind of all those conversations accumulating,
Right.
and then there's all kinds in between.
Sure.
I used to think, man, I gotta write a book about half these conversations I've had, because it's just interesting. But the ones I've had on this podcast too, it's a little bit more intentional, and that's what's really fun about it.
Right.
But so yeah, it's just a desire to know. And I just thought, since I had this business, the transportation, was kind of losing my love for it a little bit because I wasn't driving and seeing the clients, and I'm like, man, how could I tie the podcast and the business together?
Yeah.
And asking that question to myself for enough days, and the I don't know where, but the idea came from to have different leaders, different business owners, different people doing something in the community, and it's grown, and it's been the most fun I've had in my
Yeah.
life. So
Yeah.
here we are.
Well, find a need and fill it, right? There's a need for connections, especially in communities like Bozeman. I mean, it's Bozeman's different, and that's why everybody's moving here, because people can actually feel that. They can feel how different it is, how welcoming the people are, and um, so bringing that community together because we are all so diverse. Uh, it's not easy to do, but it's something that needs to be done. I'm fourth generation Montanan, and so that's quite the fascinating story how we got here. My great grandfather actually won a farm in a poker game up north of Great Falls,
Okay.
uh, and so that's how we ended up settling in Montana, just south of Fort Benton there. So, but yeah, back in the day, people actually did bet the farm.
That's a hell of a win.
Yeah, yeah, that was a pretty good win. So it was actually at the same saloon in downtown Great Falls where Charlie Russell would come in and drink with his buddies.
Okay.
Nancy'd have to come get him to go do some painting. So, it was, but it is, it's a great service you're doing for the community to bring all these diverse backgrounds into one place where we can all learn from each other and take care of each other. That's a noble, honorable thing to do.
Yeah, and hopefully it can, create a little bit more connection and leveling, because there's very widely varying opinions on no one should come here and everyone
Yeah,
wants to come here, and it's a balance because
yeah,
no one wants to. I grew up in a small farm town, and no one wants to see that turn into a big city and have all the values and everything torn away.
right,
But we also don't want to be in a town that's very depressed and there's nothing going on. So,
right.
how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, and I get that a lot from, especially from people in Great Falls. So I was a dentist in Great Falls for 30 years up there, and loved it, and it was great for my girls growing up because they were around my parents and Kelly, my wife's parents. We've been married 43 years. She's amazing. But I've seen the changes, and I get a lot of people say, why did you move to Bozeman? Well, because the kids and the grandkids are here, but also I love Bozeman. And a lot of, well, it's, people are, it's getting overrun, but I have a little different perspective on it because in 1971, 72, my dad actually had a construction company, utility company, and he did the phase one sewer and water projects at Meadow Village at Big Sky. So when I was there, 12 years old kind of time frame for 3-4 years we lived there, there was nothing. There was a Lone Mountain Guest Ranch. There was an old guy named Ken McBride, and then the Crales, original homestead was there, of course, but there was nothing. And to see what it is now, and then a guy named Tom Evenson from Choteau, a friend of my dad's, he pushed the first road in up to Mountain Village, and there was nothing there. And so to see what it is now from that, it's like, I have mixed emotions about it because so many people get to enjoy it now. But yeah, it has changed. Same with the city of Bozeman. I know when I was going to Montana State here for my undergrad stuff, uh, one of my professors said, someday from Bozeman to Four Corners will all be one big city. And we're all like, yeah, right, whatever. And to look at it now, it's crazy. But all that said, you can go to any trailhead, within half an hour of downtown Bozeman, and yeah, it might be full of cars in the parking lot, but you get a mile back in there, and there you can go all day and never see anybody. And so, if you want to, you can still be have that wilderness experience close to town, and that's the beauty of it, is that you can get to the mountains, the streams, the places that are so beautiful really quickly. And so, and as you mentioned, there's so many ancillary things that come along with that, like really good restaurants and that sort of thing.
Hi, folks. Quick note from me. If you don't already know, the goal of Mountain Mule Media is to build real connection between Montana's businesses and the people they serve. If this episode or any other has given you something worth thinking about, smiling at, or passing along, I've got a small ask. Share it with a friend, text it to someone, post it in your story. That one simple action helps these businesses get seen, grow, and thrive, and it helps this show keep going. Thank you for supporting these Montana businesses. Now back to the show.
Yeah, there's downside and there's upside, but if you think about it, since the Native Americans were here, the dialogue has been, oh, everybody's moving here. I can't believe how much it's changed. It's yeah, maybe quicker at times than others, but that's progress. That's what's going to happen. And my only concern is that I want the people that move here to assimilate into our community, to assimilate into the things that we value, and not try and change our traditional values that we have as Montanans, as kind of that rugged individualist. That's my only concern is, when people come here and they're trying to get away from something, yet it's so ingrained in them to behave and do certain things that they end up trying to change this place to be like the place they came from. And that's my only concern. It's like, if you want to come here, great. Welcome you with open arms, but I believe that it's best. That doesn't mean we can't learn and try new things, but it's, if you want to keep it beautiful and an amazing place, then assimilate into the things that have made it that way for the last couple hundred years. So,
Yeah, it's definitely a balance. There was a guy that did the podcast a while back. His name's Cy. He's from Albania originally. Big, he does catering for coffee. He does coffee catering for different
mm,
events and weddings. And Albania, California, then here. And he said he's had nothing but a great experience with everyone. But his mindset was always, I gotta respect I gotta respect the way these people live and what they do. And I always think about that word respect with Montana. I grew up in the Northeast. We didn't have grizzlies like we do here. So I just think you gotta respect those grizzlies and you gotta respect the wilderness the same way you did where I grew up, but that also applies to the culture and the locals. And if you
yeah,
can just keep that respect in mind, everyone can learn and change and evolve, and hopefully things are always changing for the better. But don't, just you wouldn't show up to somebody's house and tell them how to live, and
exactly.
it's what you're doing if you.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
i
No, I agree.
I appreciate that. Were you around 35 when you started, or 30 when you started dentist
Yeah.
practice?
Yeah. So it was a bit of a, different route to get there. So my, uh, my dad and my uncle and my grandfather started a plumbing business in Great Falls. And at one time they had the only business in Great Falls that had more employees was the city of Great Falls. It was a big business and they did really well. When my grandfather died, took up the whole front page of the newspaper, which, it's not a big deal now, but back in the day that was. And, but when I was about 17, my dad and my uncle decided to sell the company because, like say, he had worked in Big Sky and a lot of other places. He ended up traveling a lot and they didn't want that lifestyle for me because I probably would have taken over that business. And not that it was bad. They just didn't they thought there was better ways. And so here I am thinking that I'm going to take over this business, 16, 17 years old, and they sell it. And so, okay, well, what do I do? Well, I always loved, the Western way of life. I worked on ranches as a kid. And, so I thought, well, I'll go to college, get an education, right? Nobody in my family had done that. And so I wanted to stay in Montana. And so I went to MSU and I got a degree in ag economics. I thought, well, with that, I can find a job, a good job in Montana. And so I did. I got that degree, went to Great Falls, got a great job, had a great career path forward. They kept wanting to promote me, talked about me moving to Houston and then to to Honolulu and all these other places, and I could see the handwriting on the wall. The people that were higher up in the company had all left Montana and lived in different places now, and it just I didn't want that for my family, and so I just started looking at different things. I actually went to a gym at on my lunch hour, and there was a bunch of dentists there that played handball, and so afterward you'd sit in a hot tub or whatever, and they'd be like, yeah, we need some young kids to come in and take over our practices and take care of these people in Great Falls. And until then I'd never given a thought to dentistry, and but I love to. I'm good, naturally good at working with my hands. I'm naturally good at problem solving. My dad was one of those guys that he could do anything. He could, in the winter time when they couldn't dig in the ground because it was frozen, he'd tear down a D8 cat in the shop. No experience, no mechanic school, rebuild them. I mean, he could do anything. And so I watched him, and so I have a lot of problem solving skills, which is huge in dentistry. And so I just came home one day and told my wife that I think I want to be a dentist, and she was like, "Okay," looked at me kind of, it's kind of one of those "here, hold my beer" moments kind of thing. But she, like, say, we've been married 43 years. She's amazing, and she's like, "Well, yeah, we'll figure it out. If that's what you want to do. Let's go for it. We'll figure it out." And long story short, I had to come back to Bozeman to get some prerequisites out of the way that I didn't have, as far as physics and biology, biochemistry, that kind of stuff, and did really well. When I got my undergraduate degree, I probably had a C average because I worked, I paid for my own school. There was a bar called Little John's here in Bozeman, and both Kelly and I worked there. And so, yeah, but when I went back and I knew I had, I mean, if you think about that, I have two young girls. I've got a really good job, good paying job, but I just had this knowing in my gut that I was put here to do more, and to take that leap. I look back on it now and it's like I was a little crazy, and even my own family thought I was crazy. My own mom said, "Well, can you get your job back if it doesn't work out?" And so there was all that stuff, and so, but I think that's what drove. I graduated with honors in dental school, even though I was a C student in undergrad, because I had that drive, because I had so much on the line. And so, yeah, I think that was part of what made me capable of writing this book, was to have gone through some of that kind of stuff, to take that leap and be willing to lose everything as a result of that. And so, yeah, that taught me a lot.
And your daughters were already born when you decided to
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah, our oldest daughter was just starting kindergarten. And same thing, you just have to figure it out. We didn't have any backup plan. We rented out our house, which made the house payment. But Kelly didn't have a job. I couldn't work. When you're in professional school like that, you don't have time to work. And so she just figured it out. She had a daycare for a while, watched other kids so she could be with our kids when they were both in school. And she actually got a job at a periodontist office, who's, what they call a gum gardener, right? They take care of the supporting tissues around the teeth. So she got a job there to learn, because she didn't know anything about the practice of dentistry, and she actually ran the office for all the time that we were in the business, and did a fantastic job. And it was just a blessing, because I could focus on doing some really good dentistry and not have to worry about the business part of it. So that we just figured it out. And I get the credit, right, because I had the degree, but it was a team effort for sure.
You probably answered the question I was about to ask. How high of importance of who your partner in life is do you put on?
It's everything. It really is. And I look at some of my friends that have gone through traumatic relationships and got divorced or whatever, and it's just that part, the good Lord's taken care of me. And it was one of those things where when we worked the same shift one night, and I literally looked at her and said, "That's who I'm going to marry." I don't know where that came. Well, I know where it came from, but at the time I had no clue. And I just knew it. It's one of those things I just knew. And it's been such a blessing because I know so many people that struggle with relationships, and we've always been best friends. We've always taken care of each other. She's not afraid to tell me when she thinks I'm doing something that I could be doing better. She's that kind of person, just calls an ace, and I love that about her. But that who you pick as a partner is so integral to anybody that's had success. And that doesn't mean you can't get into a bad relationship and start over and still come out of that, learning some lessons. But man, when you don't have to deal with that, my father-in-law and I have conversations quite frequently, and we just can't believe how blessed we are that he same thing. He was married to my mother-in-law, Kelly's mom, their whole life, and all of the kids, all of the grandkids, they've all gone on to do amazing things. None of them have gotten in trouble. Um, that's such a blessing because there can be so much trauma to everybody involved when you don't have that. When one of the kids is sick, or has some disease of some sort, or gets into some sort of trouble, that can take a huge toll on a family. So having somebody like her that you can come home and say one day, totally off the rack, "Yeah, I think I'm going to quit my job and we're going to move to Seattle. And we don't know anybody. We don't have any money, but this is what I think we should do." And have her say, "All right, well, let's figure out how to do that." That's invaluable.
I remember when you're the thank yous at the end of the book, you said thank you to your wife. Do you remember how you phrased it for being there through all your, maybe it was all your like transitions through? Do you remember how you phrased that?
What I do remember most about that, Tim, is that's the one part of the book that I had to record about 6 times
Hmm.
because I had a hard time holding it together.
Hmm.
I really did. It was, and when I wrote that, it just came from the heart. It wasn't like an emotional thing, but man, when I read that and heard myself reading that, we literally had to stop at least half a dozen times for me to compose myself because it's that raw, it's that emotional, and and it's so true. I mean, that's again, you can't put a price tag on having somebody like that that supports you. And the same thing with my kids. They're got 2 daughters. They're amazingly successful. One of them, her and her husband Jack Duncans, they live here in between Belgrade and Manhattan. He works for RDO. It's a test and balance company where they take these bigger businesses and make sure the all the systems are working properly. And then she's a software developer guru. She has a unique gift because she's like her mom. She just figures stuff out. And like when she was in school here at MSU, she was very unique because first of all, she was the only female in her class, but she has a communication skill that most of those people with those technical skills don't have. So she has done really well for herself because she has the best of both of those things. And she just, again, a good kid. They have 2 kids, and then I have another daughter in Michigan that actually trains realtors. They have a great big team, and she's the head trainer there, and goes all over the country speaking to other teams about how to build their team and do it, with integrity. And so yeah, they're and her husband Mike is from that area out there. They've got 2 kids, so I'm just very blessed. 2 daughters and 4 grandkids. They hope they each have a boy and a girl, which is special for me because now I have my boys.
Hmm.
That's one of the things that drives me to stay young and vibrant and healthy, so I can go teach them to do the things that I love to do. And that's the other reason I wrote the book, was for them. If something happened to me, prematurely, I want them to know how I think that they should conduct themselves. And so, yeah, that was a very emotional part of the book for me to
Yeah, it was very cool to hear that. And so maybe I'm a little bit younger than like who the book would be directly targeted for, although I think it can apply to anyone at any age.
yeah.
So when you had that transition that you said your wife was there when you're like, "Hey, I'm totally gonna change what I'm doing and I'm gonna go be a dentist." Do you notice that pattern in a man's life that happens, several times from I'm 34, say 34 to 64, and it's just you're kind of continually evolving and transitioning? Because I noticed a big one, at least for myself. A lot of people I've spoke with in their mid 20s, and they say that's around when your frontal lobe finishes developing somewhere around
Yeah.
there. And I'll notice it with people that they'll really, because if you'd asked me when I was in my 20s and most of my younger years, I was going to be a farmer for life. And then I got into my mid 20s and for various reasons, but I was like, man, there's something different that I need to be doing and want to be doing and want to see other parts of the world. And it's day and night difference. And I just wonder how many times does this happen again in life? Because
Yeah.
I'm sure once you get married and you have kids and there's a lot of shifts of
Yeah.
through that, through life.
Yeah. But that's Tim, that's really um, honorable that you recognize that, because you will have those times. And a lot of the problem I see with a lot of people is those things happen, those times happen, and they don't recognize that or celebrate that. I think the biggest thing for people to pay attention to is that you will have a knowing. It's just, and you can describe that however you want, a gut feeling. I mean, there's more and more research that's, talking about how our gut is actually our second brain, right? We've talked about it for years, but people really don't embrace that. When people say they have a gut feeling, it really is a real thing. And the problem is we need to pay attention to that. And a lot of people either don't pay attention to that or they suppress that. They know they are out of alignment. You don't have to know why or how you know that. You have this feeling that you're out of alignment, and you got to pay attention to that. Those things matter. And what happens is you'll have doors open up in your life that you need to walk through. And you need to have the wisdom to know which doors to walk through and which ones not to walk through. But the other part of that is it's okay to walk through the wrong door and learn from that, and figure out that that's not what you needed to do, but there was lessons you learned by walking through that wrong door that will help you find the right door that leads you down the path that you need to get to. And that really is the basics of anti-fragility. And we can talk, because understanding that word and what it means is paramount for people to understand. So to answer your question, you will have times in your life, and you won't recognize it maybe right then, but when you look back, you will have times in your life where there was a pivot or a shift in literally who you were. And you know uh, and that's all encompassing: how you thought, how you behaved, how you viewed the world. There'll literally be a shift, and those times do happen. I think it's different for everyone. And I think it's different because some people embrace that gut feeling and actually do something about it.
Hey folks, Tim here with Mountain Mule. I've got an exciting announcement that 2026, this spring and summer, we are going to start offering park tours through Yellowstone National Park. We're excited to add this to the options of things that we offer. The tours are going to start and end in Bozeman tentatively, but we will expand those options and make them somewhat customizable to the greater Gallatin Valley area. And more of this will continue to develop as we build out the programs. Please visit mountain-mule.com and we'll keep all the updates there. We're excited to be able to offer this to the services that we provide.
but a lot of people just push it down because it's hard. It's when you take that leap, when you do that thing, um, it can be really scary. And a lot of times, it can be costly from an economic standpoint, from a energy standpoint. And so it's harder to take that leap. But I promise you, if you have a gut feeling and you do those things that help you get more toward being aligned with who you know you are at the basic level, when you take those steps, that's the essence of life. And that's in fact what you were put here to do. That's your purpose. A lot of people, when I start working with them, they're like, well, I don't know what my purpose is. And, that takes time to vet that. But the basic premise is when you take your God-given talents, the things that you're good at, Tim, that other people aren't, that you take for granted. It's like, well, yeah, of course, that's the way you do that, right? When you take those God-given talents and then you figure out what the needs of people are, where you find that intersection, what you're really good at naturally and what people need, if you pursue that uh, direction in life, you'll always be on the right track. And don't be afraid to fail, right? A lot of people are so afraid to fail. That's why they don't embrace those gut feelings, those knowings, is because they think that failure is bad. The word failure implies something bad. But to me, again, when you look at the word anti-fragility, failure is just, we never fail. We either win or we learn. And when we can fully embrace that concept, your whole world will change. So there will be times where you will have these shifts, these pivots. You've got to pay attention to when your body, your gut, your mind is telling you you need to do something, and you do need to take action.
When you talked about change, being scary or it can be nerve wracking, the thought that came to my mind was terrifying. And I know you talked about this in your book, but it reminds me of the cold shower. No matter
Yeah,
how many times you do it, it still sucks the next day. And
absolutely.
I've experienced that very similar. It's just like for me, I just use the word terrifying because it's, yeah, financially, there's a lot of the discomfort in the body. What I've seen my body do, almost watched it third person, what it does because it's terrified of this. It's like, what the hell's going on? None of this feels normal. I'm totally out of homeostasis. Everything's, and I've had to watch and be like, it's almost like you're talking to a kid. You're like, hey, like this is how it goes. It's gonna get better. But yeah, I just use terrifying. And I love that you say in alignment because my fiance says that all the time. It's partially through the work she does, but she always says, are you living in alignment with what you want to be doing and who you are? And we were having this conversation last night because we were talking about this interview, but it's interesting for us to think, and we're not married yet, we're engaged, but we've said, in 5 years, we're not going to be the same people, but we're going to, realize that we're both going to change. And I
Right.
think that's at least what I see in successful relationships and marriages is people, accept that change. And I even think about this from this business. If I want to grow this business, it's going to take a different person than who I am now. And I
Absolutely.
have to accept that. And I think it's the same thing with a marriage and a relationship, but it's that, I don't know, that terrifying change. And I've been there 100 times and I've not done it. And then I'm like, man, I knew I walked through the wrong door, but it's ultimately led me to the right door.
Right. Absolutely. And that's the thing. You can't be afraid to stick your neck out there a little bit. Now, it can be scary, and you don't want to be stupid and reckless about this, right? And make that at the end of the day, what really matters is that you make more good decisions than you make poor decisions. And if you look at the big companies of the world, the Amazons, all these big companies, if you really look back at all of the things they did to get there, they have way more businesses or companies that they bought on the way to get there that failed than the ones that actually took off. So I think the layperson thinks that, that you can't fail. that you have to, you have to get all the information, and you have to, be 100% certain before you take the leap to try and do something different, or to try and satisfy that knowing inside of you. And that's just, that's the wrong way to live your, we only get one shot at this, right? And so you have to be smart about it. You have to gather information. You have to talk to people smarter than you. That's one of the things that I learned early on, is I had really good mentors, and either in person, or we've talked about, people like Jim Rohn and Dr. Wayne Dyer, and I'm a huge Teddy Roosevelt fan. I mean, those people, when you study them, listen to them, learn about them, there's certain commonalities. And so you don't go blindly into new things, just trying them because it sounded like a good idea. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, in your heart of hearts, that, there's certain things that you should be doing. And so look, you don't have to have the door open up and then run right through there. You can kind of look and see what's on the other side a little bit first. But when those doors open up, when things happen like that, you have to pay attention to that. And the biggest thing I see is that people, they number one, they don't even pay attention when those things are happening. When they don't put any thought into that, they don't, like you and your fiance having that level of discussion at this point is honorable, because that's what needs to happen. That's how you develop a life together. That's how you grow together to help each other. And you will be totally different people 5 years from now than you are now. But the question is, are you going to be better people? Are you going to have a bigger impact? Are you going to be more in love? Are you going to be better partners? And as long as the answer to that is yes, then absolutely those are things that you need to do, but you need to have those discussions. It's crazy to me how many people enter into something, to me, as sacred as marriage, and have not had some of these discussions, at least, where you want to go, what kind of the end game is. Because here's the deal that I've learned, Tim, is absolutely 100% thoughts become things. Okay. And what I teach my clients all the time is that you can have whatever you want, anything that you want. And a lot of people say, yeah, right, but I've got this or that limitation or whatever. The reason you don't have anything that you could possibly want in life is because you have those limiting beliefs. And I talk about that a lot in the book. But here's what I can tell you 100% for sure, is that if you decide, and especially with a new partner, what it is that you want, a lot of people will start with the how. And I think that comes from guys like us growing up on, in rural areas and that sort of thing. You have to figure out how you're going to feed the cows in the morning, or how you're going to get this done, or how you're going to get that done. And we were also taught that to get more, you have to grind harder, right? But that thinking is wrong. And the more you study some of these great leaders, the more you'll understand that what needs to come first, you need to focus on what it is that you want. And when you become really clear on what it is that you want, and I mean, you can use all of your senses, you can smell it, you can taste it, you can feel it, you have an image of that in your mind, whatever it is. When you're clear on what it is that you want, and you focus on that on a daily basis, you just get quiet and focus on that, the how will reveal itself. And we don't need to go too far down that rabbit hole, but energetically speaking, that's how the universe works. That's how, and I don't care if you believe in God or whatever, I do. There is a higher power. I can say that with 100% certainty. When you go to professional school and you study anatomy and physiology, and you look at how the body is put together, to think that it just happened by a couple of bacteria coming together, is preposterous. If you think about it this way, Tim, we have the smartest people in our society trying to reverse engineer this thing called the human body, and we can't figure it out. And we think we do, and then that turns out to be wrong. We're trying to reverse engineer how our physiology works, and all these smartest people with AI and everything can't figure that out. There's something going on. There's a higher power. So if you focus on what it is that you want, and you're very clear on that, and you do that repeatedly over time, the how will reveal itself, and sometimes in the most bizarre ways. And I can tell you this with certainty because I've done this over and over and over throughout my life with different things that I've wanted to have happen. And I've also helped hundreds of my clients now do that same thing. And it sounds crazy, but it absolutely works every time. So thoughts actually become things. There's a fascinating book. I don't know if you read it, by Dr. Bruce Lipton, The Biology of Belief, but he actually uh, shows in that book and proves, and he actually teaches, he lectures about this, but you can actually see cellular changes, things happening at the cellular level based upon the thoughts that you have. So those thoughts absolutely become things. But so many people just stumble around and they think that's woo woo, and they don't put any effort into that, and they don't pay attention when those synchronicities happen. And that's a mistake. So the fact that you're talking about this, thinking about it, tells me that you're absolutely on the right track.
Yeah, I appreciate that you said that, because I know you said it sounds crazy, and I completely agree with you, and I know it still just does sound crazy to most people. I haven't read that book, but I know Bruce Lipton, and I say this to my fiance all the time. It's kind of a running joke when people use that term. This sounds very woo woo. That I think most of life is pretty woo woo
Absolutely.
because how do you? There's so much that as you're saying, the smartest people in the world can't explain, and we look at these things like phones and our technology and the way our human body heals, and we're like, oh, that's just normal, but this sounds crazy. And my response is, give me a break. Like,
Yeah.
all of this is everything I see that goes on in life blows my mind and is the most beautiful miracle in the world. But if you don't take the time to appreciate that and see it, you just look at it as, oh, that's normal, that makes sense. And
Right. Right. I talk about that in the book. There's a term called epistemic humility. And what that means is, we've all heard the term, you can't always believe what you think you know. But that's essentially what epistemic humility is. It's like we think we know certain things, but you can't always believe that, right? We all know you don't know what you don't know. I mean, that kind of makes intuitive sense. But to think about the fact that you can't always believe what you think you know, that opens up a whole new world, and it makes you process information in a different way. And so I think that's a really important concept for people to understand. And the other part of that is, Tim, is when you lose that kind of childish, um, way of thinking about things, that kind of fascination, if you will, man, when you lose that, that's a really sad time in people's lives. When you look at people that are struggling, people that, um, have a victim mentality, that's a big part of it. Is they just lose their excitement of life. Um, when I first started in dentistry, I was excited because there was a study club down here in Bozeman started by an oral surgeon, and we would get together every month and bring in guest speakers or whatever. Somebody would do a clinic on a new procedure, or whatever. And I was just out of school, so I was kind of up on all the new things, but there's certain things that doing things over time will teach you too, that wisdom. And so I was really excited about it. One of the guys that I initially worked with in dentistry said, oh, I go to the continuing education because you have to. to keep your license. But after a while, you'll find, Gene, that you'll find that it's just the same stuff over and over. And I remember walking out of his office and going, man, if I ever get to the point in life where I feel like there's nothing more to learn, that's going to be so sad because leaders and winners are fascinated by learning. And there's never an end to that. And when you look at that epistemic humility thing, there's a lot of times when you get older, you have to unlearn things that you thought you learned or that you thought you knew. So that's the fascinating part of life. And we could literally talk for days, Tim, about that. When you start going down that rabbit hole about, spirituality and why we're here and all that kind of stuff, it's it's a fascinating topic.
I'm glad you said that because I had a note here because I was listening to the audiobook when I was traveling last weekend. You said you have that written in different places in your office. Is that correct? You can't always believe what you think you know.
Yeah,
Is that
absolutely.
what
Yeah.
am I getting that right? That's,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. Because I thought, man, I want to have that in my office and in the shop for the guys. Cause
Yeah.
Craig says that he's been driving with us the last year. So much of this job is psychology because there's so much communication with people.
Yeah.
And, it's reading people, but I think that's a great thing to keep in mind in approaching all life is
Yeah.
you can't believe what you think you know.
Absolutely. And when you do that, you'll listen to people differently. You'll hear them differently, and you'll actually, what a lot of people do, in my opinion, that's wrong, and I've been guilty of this myself when I was younger, is you listen to somebody and the whole time you're trying to figure out what you're going to say in response to that. And when you can recognize that you're doing that and start to listen to people and actually try to figure out what they're saying and what that means to you and ask better questions, that's where you become a better human, when you can start doing things like that. Because when you're only listening to come up with your answer, that's your ego, right? That's your ego talking to you. And a lot of times it's like, and it starts when we're little kids. You want to, your buddy tells you a story and you want to have a better story, right? And so it starts real young, and then you start to normalize that. But once you can start to actually listen to people and think about, and that's why I encourage my clients to not just read books about things they agree with or people they agree with, but read books from people with ideas or philosophies that you don't necessarily agree with or think that you agree with, because it's important to know how other people think, and it will help you with that epistemic humility that maybe what I thought was maybe really not, maybe I shouldn't believe that, or maybe I can change that, or maybe I can think about that in a better way. So it's just, these are all just levels. You talk about these times in your life where there's these major shifts in life events. That's it's like a shift in your physical life will happen too, but these shifts in your mental life, your understanding, and that's the definition. That's what wisdom is, right? At the end of the day, that's what wisdom is to take all these lessons you've learned and hopefully become a better person as a result of that. And then I feel your obligation, just like I did with the book, then your obligation is to share that with other people, younger people. So you mentioned about the book, and the target audience. You're absolutely right. It's, that I've had a lot of women read the book because it's called The Antifragile Man, but my intention was human, right? Because I tried to write about the principles, and principles don't change, right? Theories can change, thoughts can change, dogmas can change, but principles by definition don't change. So if we can identify a few basic principles that work for the masses of people, then we have something we can hang our hat on that we can use as a starting point to help us get better, whether that's physically, mentally, spiritually, however, you need or want to grow. If we have the basic principles, then it works. So my intention was twofold. Number one, like I already mentioned, was for my grandkids to know how I think that it would be good for them to conduct themselves in the future, regardless of AI or any of that kind of stuff. Those principles are going to remain the same. But I also, when I travel around a lot, Tim, to different continuing education and lectures and that sort of thing, I travel a lot to bigger cities. And I think in Montana, especially the native Montanans, or the people that come here and assimilate into our society, we already uh, are far ahead of some of these other people. And I think a lot of these younger men in particular growing up in these cities, they don't know how to conduct themselves. They're confused. They, the only men that get attention in our society and the news and that sort of thing is the Bernie Madoffs and those people that get, all this negative press, and they should. But the problem is a lot of these younger men in bigger cities, especially if they don't have a strong father figure, is they don't know how to conduct themselves. And worse yet, they hear two words, toxic masculinity, and they equate that to, okay, being a guy, there must be something wrong with that. And don't get me wrong, there are toxic males out there. There's also toxic females out there. And so that word, those two words are very dangerous for these young people to hear, because they don't have the filters yet to understand that, well, yeah, that is a thing, but that's not most guys. And that's not most people and men, how they conduct themselves. So I wanted, especially like the single moms, or these kids that are growing up in a city that don't get the opportunities. I think living and conducting yourself in the outdoors is such a great teacher. It teaches you so many things about survival, problem solving, taking care of yourself, taking care of other people. It teaches you so many lessons that we can use on so many different levels in life, that a lot of these kids that grow up in a city don't have the opportunity to do that. And so that was another target audience for my book, was some of these younger men growing up. And to have, not that I'm a role model, but to have somebody that maybe thinks differently about these things, and somebody that may inspire them to maybe look a little more about what being a good human, and more importantly, a good man, a leader, somebody that's a protector that can take care of their family and other people. Because I mean, let's face it, there's so much talk, and we had a discussion about that, about men and women, and like these biological males in women's sports and that sort of thing. And the thing people get wrong a lot of times is that men and women are equal, but we're not the same. And again, it's two words that a lot of people think mean the same thing, but they couldn't be further from the truth. We are equal in every way, and we should be, but we're not the same. And we all have things biologically that were that's not to say that women can't be amazingly strong and powerful, but in general, men are stronger than women physically because of testosterone, right? And so there's certain things that men are going to be better at, just like we talked about those God-given talents, than women are. And that's okay. In fact, that's good. We need the yin and the yang, the up and the down. We need that. We need contrast in life for us to grow and get better. If we don't have any contrast, you don't know what different is. You have no reference point is. So we need that in our society. We need strong females and we need strong males, and we need to work together in a way that benefits everybody. So I think that was, another impetus for writing the book was to help maybe shed some light for some of these younger men that really don't have a role model or somebody that is nurturing them like my father did. Um, so yeah, I hope that helps him too, and also for older men to live life to its fullest. I think that's one of my biggest things that I do in my business is to help these men that kind of think the best years are behind them, and they're talking about how they scored the winning touchdown in the high school football game, and I care about what have you done lately, what have you done now, and what are you planning on doing in the future, and uh to inspire them to understand that this last third, I mean, I'm 65, right? So this last third of your life can and should be the best third of your life, because now you have all of this wisdom. You've learned all these lessons. You know what not to do, and you also know what you're good at. And if you recognize that, and then you take that, and now you have a little bit of extra time, and you should have a little bit of extra money if you've done things right. Now it's your turn to give back, to reach down and lend a hand to these other people and pull them back up. But if you haven't got your own house in order, you're not going to be strong enough to help these other people. So, my my purpose is to inspire older men that, hey, this last third of your life should and will be the best third of your life, but you have to get things in order, right? And that's why we're big on in my I call it the Gene Tough program. It's kind of a play on words because my name is Gene, obviously, but it's not that I'm so tough, but there you want to make your genes tough, right? So people talk about, well, I got bad genetics, good genetics, and that there is a component of genetics, but there's also something called epigenetics, right? Which epi means on top of. So on top of your genetics, there's things that we do in our environment that can affect whether our genes get a chance to express themselves or not. So I get a lot of people, a lot of guys, well, why should I work out? Why should I try and eat good? Because, all the men in my family die of a heart attack at 45. I got bad genes. That may be true. You may have the heart attack gene that's been identified what that is, but it's like, have you ever opened up a garage door opener or looked inside?
I
There's,
guess a little bit,
there's
yeah.
these little toggle switches.
Hmm.
There's like 10 of them or whatever, and some of them are up and some of them are down, and that's what determines the code for your garage door. So it works. Well, that's the same thing with our genetics. It's all these little switches. And if you don't do things in your environment to turn that gene on, it will never get a chance to express itself. And so a lot of people think that, well, I can't do this, I can't do that because I have bad genetics. Well, I'm here to tell you, if you do certain things in your environment, like eating right, like training in a specific way for the goals that you have, like getting your mind right, if you do those things, the reason families have guys that tip over at 45 from a heart attack is mostly because they have the same thing in the refrigerator, and they do the same thing after Thanksgiving dinner, sit on the couch and watch football. That's why those genes get turned on. So that's a big part of my training program, is helping people understand that just because you may have a little more difficult road because you've got less than ideal genetics, but you absolutely have 100% control of that. So those are the principles that, if we start to embrace them, can change everything in our life.
And that, a lot of what you're speaking with the epigenetics, that speaks a lot of what Bruce Lipton talks about, correct?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've been involved in that for a number of years with different products, with different companies. So when I was in dentistry, we started a group. It's called the AOSH, the American Academy of Oral Systemic Health, and our purpose was to get the dental community and the medical community at large talking to each other, because we weren't talking to each other. It was like two separate entities. And what some of us recognize is that there's a huge correlation causal correlation, not just maybe sort of. It's actually causal that periodontal pathogens, in other words, certain bacteria in the mouth, and though we've narrowed it down to 3 different bacteria, that if you had those pathogens in your mouth and you had the genetic predisposition for heart attacks and strokes, that you were way more likely to suffer from a heart attack and stroke. And so what we did is we developed some tests to measure those 3 specific bacteria. So if somebody came into my practice and they had periodontal disease, which is, loss of supporting structure around the teeth, the gums, the bone tissue, bleeding, when you floss your teeth and brush and that sort of thing, if they had those signs and symptoms, we would actually do a salivary test to measure for these types of bacteria. And if they had those, there was a group, 2 doctors in particular that started. It's called the Bale-Donine method. Their last names. They started a company and a clinic that would guarantee that you'd never suffer from a heart attack or stroke if you were a client of theirs, a patient of theirs, which was it still is to me. It's fascinating. Who in the medical community will actually guarantee the outcome of their treatment? Nobody does that. But we were so sure of, how we elucidated what the risk factors were, and if we mitigated those risk factors, that they wouldn't suffer something like a heart attack and a stroke. That was fascinating. And they're still in business to this day. The problem is, and I don't want to, offend anybody or whatever, but there's a problem with the system. So I talk about this a lot in my talks and lectures, is that we don't, in the United States, we talk about, we got to fix our healthcare system. We don't really have a healthcare system. We have a disease care system. And so there's nobody better in the world at treating disease once it's already happened. But the disconnect comes when our physicians are trained in such a way that they are trained in disease care. And there's very, very little. I think in dental school, we had more training on preventive therapies with nutrition, because nutrition affects your dental health as well. We had more training than the medical students did, around nutrition, because they just simply don't have enough time to teach all of that. And so the problem is we need to start focusing more on prevention instead of treating the disease once it's already happened. Now, thank God we have doctors. I'm not throwing them under the bus at all. Thank God we have them, but they're set up to not to fail, but they're set up to treat disease, because that's the focus. And unfortunately, that's how the hospitals make money. And so sometimes you have to follow the money. And so that's one of the other reasons I'm so adamant about preaching the things that I preach, is because the things that I talk about around nutrition and training and the importance of all of these things you're not going to hear them from your doctor. You're not going to hear them because they don't have time, right? They don't have time. They just, the system isn't set up for that. You're not going to hear it from pharmaceutical companies because they have a disincentive for you to be healthy, right? That's how their system works. So the only way we're going to turn this train around is if guys like you and me start learning these principles. We start teaching other people these principles. That's why the book is based on principles, so people can start to take care of their own health and have a knowledge base so they can do that. And then when you do that, then these epigenetic things start to matter. So to tie this all back in, when we have ways to measure the bacteria in the mouth, we have ways and protocols to measure certain things in blood work that most doctors aren't measuring, that they do at the Bale-Donine clinic. When you do those things, you follow those protocols, you'd never have to suffer from some of these most debilitating diseases. So those principles are out there, but the problem is they get suppressed. We'd have people come in, we'd teach them these principles, cardiologists, what have you, and they'd go back to their hospital, their clinic, and all of a sudden they're teaching prevention principles, and their cath lab's not as full, their cardiac rehab's not as full, and the hospital administrators are wondering why their numbers are down. And again, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but so these well-meaning doctors that are trying to learn these principles are getting kind of shot down because it doesn't fit the business model. And like I say, I'm not trying to be cynical about that. I'm just saying we need people to understand these principles. We need to follow through with them, because that's the way we're all going to change. If you want to change the cost of healthcare, the best way to do that is prevention by far.
Yeah, and I used to see this more in agriculture because I grew up on a dairy farm, but it's very well-meaning doctors and veterinarians. They're a product of this giant system. And kind of what you said,
Absolutely.
if you they don't have the time to explain all this prevention, and if they're not, they got some big student loans to pay off. So
Absolutely.
they need to be, they need to be generating that income. And the way this system is built is, can I get 40 patients through my office this day? I've got 15 minutes for each of them, and this is going to help me pay off my debt and hopefully
Right.
have the life I imagined. And I don't know, somewhere you get to where the stream starts, but there's a lot that does need to change. It's not
Yeah.
as simple as just, like tell this doctor, but I think they really do mean well. And I've been in weird positions too, because we were taught a lot of things and understood a lot of things in agriculture that seemed right. And it was almost, but it's almost like dogma now. Like, yeah, it's okay. We're just going to spray all this weed killer on our crops because
Right.
that's how we get the highest yield. That's how
Right.
we actually make money.
Right.
So we got to fertilize everything to a large extent and put a lot of pesticides on it. And sometimes some of that stuff is needed for certain things, but definitely not at the capacity we do. And then we're eating that. And now
Right.
we're dealing with those and it just, I don't know where it begins, but I completely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, we need to have discussions like this, like we're having right now, to number one, open people's eyes up to the fact that that's going on, and then we all together can come up with better solutions. But we have to pay attention, we have to learn, and then we have to be pragmatic about it. We have to, like, say that the crazy thing is, it may sound like I'm throwing doctors under the bus, but I was one. And I know they're well-meaning. And the other thing I know is they would welcome some relief. There's plenty of business to go around from trauma and things that unfortunately happen to people regardless of how they conduct themselves. So they would welcome the general population to be more healthy. The orthopedic surgeons would love it if people were more healthy, so that when they go to fix their broken leg from a car accident, they actually have some good bone to screw into, right? They would love for us to do that. So it's, there can be, instead of a us against them kind of thing, there can be a synergy where we step up as individual humans, learn what we can, learn the principles to take care of ourselves, and actually give a damn enough to take care of ourselves and make a difference and teach other people the things that have worked for us. And when we do that, the system gets better, the cost of healthcare comes down, the doctors get some relief, so they're not, you know, crazy slammed all the time and, sleep deprived. And I mean, if I actually have a nephew right now that's in medical school, and I think about, what he has to go through to get to the point where he can, treat patients. And I just, if we can do things on our own to make ourselves healthy, there's plenty of business for them to be had by just taking care of the other things that are beyond our control. So we need to take charge. And that's another reason I wrote the book. It's like, if you follow the principles in the book, the principles, they'll get you 80% of the way there. Right. There's a lot of people, when I start talking to them, they're like, well, what's the best supplement to take? And it's like, if you look at a pyramid, right, the base of the pyramid, the most important part of the pyramid when it comes to overall health, I argue, is nutrition. Right. you know, everybody said it throughout history, right? You know, food is medicine, you know, and you are what you eat. And all of those things are absolutely true. So we have to take control of that. Like you say, we have to know what's in our food. We have to stay away from this I mean, if you're doing one thing nutritionally, stay away from processed foods. I mean, and I think we all know that intuitively, but then we don't hold ourselves accountable, and we don't set the example. That's what I'm huge on with my clients is you be the one. You be the one in your family that says, we're not going to pizza every night. Okay. If you want to go occasionally, that's fine. Maybe there's better choices than that. Maybe there's better types of pizza, whatever, but you be the one to set the example. And when they do that, if their family is eaten a certain way their whole life, and then they start conducting themselves in that way, people won't say that. And in fact, most of the time they will try and sabotage them, because here's what happens when my clients start getting in shape, their family inadvertently is afraid that they're going to lose them. They don't want them to change. They don't want them to grow, to get better, because they're afraid that if they get better, they lose weight or whatever, that they're going to go try and find another partner or whatever. And so these well-meaning people, especially in their families, start to sabotage them, start to self-sabotage them, because they don't want them to change. And the problem is, it's easier for people to bring other people back down to their level for them to say, well, maybe I need to step up. So when other people start leading by example, and the worst thing you can do is start to say, well, you got to do this and you got to do that. And, you know, shame on you for eating that. You just go conduct yourself in a certain way. Other people will see that. They'll see the difference it's making in your life, and they'll start to follow. And then there's this whole ripple effect. I talk about that all the time with my clients. Is like, I know we're focusing on you and we're focusing on getting you better, but you have to understand the ripple effect this is going to have for generations. You can be the one in your family right now, Tim. You can decide to be the one that changes the future for the next 3-4 generations, at least. You have the power to do that. Okay. But you have to understand that, you have to want that, you have to educate yourself, but absolutely you can do that. So this ripple effect of you taking care of yourself and other people watching you and start taking better care of themselves, then we change families. When we change families together, we change communities. And that's how we're going to change this whole problem with quote unquote healthcare.
Yeah, I love it. I can speak to it a little bit, and I'm sure you can speak to it even a lot more. But I got a lot better about my diet. Let's say in my mid-20s, and maybe I was ahead of my time given I'm in my mid-20s. But there's a lot of pushback and discomfort, and at this point, though, it's so second nature to me that I don't mind. Because it could be seen as oh, you're being difficult. You won't eat this. You won't eat this. But
Yeah.
everyone in my family now, whether they were really resistant to it or on board, they respect it now. And now they just know to ask me, hey, like, will you? So it gets to a point where you, like you said, you build enough of a community around you. You have someone like you around yourself. And then you get enough, and it just takes time. It's back to that discomfort thing.
Yeah.
But once it's cemented enough, for me, it's just the way I live my life. And I love the ripple effect. I think about it with this podcast all the time, the people I've gotten to talk to and what it's done for the community. And a couple of weeks ago, a guy was telling me, was at his Christmas party, and someone called him and said they listened to his podcast and booked his services for their business. And that, it's a ripple effect you don't think about when you're doing it, but you see that later. And I think that it ties right back into this with food, the way you live your life. That ripple effect it'll touch the community and ultimately can touch the whole world.
For sure. And you never know who's watching. I mean, I'm really cognizant of that with my 2 young grandsons, is they're fascinating because they watch everything. They'll come up to me 6 months from the time something happened, and they'll tell me about something that happened that I'd totally forgot about it. it looks like they're just running around playing raising hell, but they're watching everything you do. And it's really apparent with your grandkids or your kids because you see that, but there's other people that's happening to. I just did a book signing at the Ridge Athletic Club here, which I got to shout out to them. They're just amazing for the community. So just like what you're doing here, Tim, I mean they're fantastic at supporting the community. All these Christmas things that they do to help the community, educate people about wellness. They're just fantastic. And so Steve and Lee over there invited me to do a book signing there last week, and I had people just show up that weren't even going to the gym, that walked in just to say hello. Some of them came in and bought a book, but they just they came in, said hello, and to encourage me to keep doing what I was doing. And that was so humbling to think that here's somebody that, because when you're doing this kind of stuff, you have no idea. I know in my clients that I train one-on-one, I know that it literally changes their life because, like you were saying, with you conducting yourself in a certain way, we absolutely 100% change their identity. And that's what it takes when you have to change your whole identity to change your behavior. Most people get this wrong. And I think it's something that people need to understand is a lot of people, when I'm talking to them in the beginning, they just like, well, I lack motivation. And the problem is that's like getting the wagon before the horse, right? Because motivation actually comes last. What needs to happen is you need to have a system, which I tried to lay out with the principles in the book. You need to have a system that gets results. And the way you have a system that gets results is you have accountability. Okay. So if you have a system with accountability, you will get results. And when you have a system with accountability that gets results, then you will develop the discipline to do that, because now you know that if I don't do that, then I'm going to go back to where I was. And I don't want to do that because I've seen all this progress. So when you have the system with the accountability that gets the results, then you develop the discipline. And when you have all of those things, that develops the motivation. Because when you look at motivation, there's motivation away from things. So that's what most people, when they talk about doing, I'm doing this diet, right? And I hate the word diet because it implies restriction, and there doesn't have to be restriction. Um, so, but So they don't want to be fat anymore. So they're motivated away from being fat. I don't want to be fat. I don't want this. I don't want that in my life. And that will get you to a certain point. But what happens, Tim, is when you get to the point where you're not fat anymore, or whatever it is, you're not that anymore, then what is going to drive you forward? Then what's going to motivate you to move forward? And that's where this motivation needs to be motivation towards something. So when you start to think about things in terms of, I'm motivated to be this, it's not, I'm not motivated not to be fat. I'm motivated to be strong and healthy and vibrant and a great member of my community. When you start becoming motivated towards something, that's when your whole life changes. So people really need to embrace that. You need a system with accountability that will absolutely get you results. And when you get the results, then you have the discipline to keep doing that same thing. And when you have that discipline, that will help motivate you toward being your best self.
Yeah, I find that so important, the word choice, and I'm more cognizant of it these days because when I'm editing stuff, I'm hearing back talking, and I think I really appreciate that you say, focus on the health, don't focus on the not fat, because the not fat, there's still an emphasis on fat. And if
Yes.
that's the only thing that's driving you, you're kind of, it's just, it's backwards. I don't think it might not be our first instinct, but I really appreciate that because yeah, once the fat's gone, fat is still the key word that
Yes.
that drove the whole focus.
Yep. And That's the other thing I try to really emphasize to my clients is words matter. Little things like, oh, I'm really worried about this, right? If you think about the word worry, there's nothing but negative connotations. There's fear, there's scarcity, there's all these things around the word worry. And so I tell them to change that word to concern. Okay. So it's okay to be concerned about things because that makes your unconscious mind think, okay, well, if this is what I'm concerned about, what are some potential solutions to that? But what worry says to your unconscious mind is, fear. Let's get away from that. This is going to be terrible. And this constant gnawing in the back of your mind because you're worrying about something. So little things like that, just little word changes can literally change people's lives. And that's the problem. That's why I try and really talk about that in the book is these unconscious beliefs that we have that drive so much of our behavior. They can be valuable, but they can be really dangerous because it's that same thing. We don't even know they're running. So just to go down that rabbit hole a little bit, because a lot of people don't really embrace that. We have our conscious behaviors, conscious beliefs. So that's like, I'm going to reach up here and grab my coffee cup but I don't have to, the unconscious part of that is I don't have to think, okay, I'm going to contract my fingers and then I'm going to contract my radiobrachialis in my arm and then my bicep. I don't have to think about all those things. Those are all automatic. Just like when I drove out here today, I didn't have to think, okay, I got to push this button and now I have to press on the gas a little bit, but it's just automatic. Okay. And most of us have these automatic programs, these old cassette tapes, 8 tracks, reel to reels, CDs, whatever, these things running, like you go into a doctor's office and there's this thing running on a loop. That's what your unconscious mind is. And you're not even aware of it. And the crazy thing, Tim, is what a lot of people don't understand, these unconscious beliefs, these program beliefs we have, most of them were programmed between 0 and 7 years old. Not 1 and 7, but 0. And this is another thing that Bruce Lipton's really good at talking about is we learn things in the womb through our mother's interaction to the environment, that whole epigenetic thing, right? So between 0 and 7 years old, we're programmed with these beliefs, good, bad, right or wrong. It doesn't matter. We have these beliefs that these are how we're supposed to perceive things in the world. And if we don't recognize that's going on, a lot of times these were well-meaning people in our lives, usually close family members or teachers or whatever, that were trying to protect us and take care of us. But a lot of these beliefs are wrong. They're erroneous. A lot of people were taught that money is bad, money is evil, all these things around money. And so they, they'll get a little bit of money. They become adults and they'll make some money, but then they lose it and they can't figure out why they get really close. They start to pay their bills off and then they lose it. It's because they have this unconscious belief that some well-meaning person taught them that money was evil. Well, if they start to think about that, and that's where some of my coaching is so valuable for these people, because it's really hard to identify your limiting beliefs. And when you're having conversation with other people that understand that, they can point these things out, these words. And so money is not evil. If you're already an asshole, money's just going to make you a bigger asshole. If you're already a good person, you're going to be a better person. So it's not the money that's the problem. But you have to identify that you have those beliefs in the back of your mind whenever you feel yourself almost getting somewhere and then getting slapped in the face, going backwards, and you see that pattern happening over and over. You need to understand and you need to recognize, hey, where is that belief coming from? And the way I help people understand this is like, it's okay to have beliefs about anything, but the key is, does that belief serve you? So, like when you're a little kid, you believed in Santa Claus, right? Because some well-meaning person told you to believe in Santa Claus. And well, if that serves you and you wake up Christmas morning and you have all these amazing gifts that you wanted under the tree, then that's an okay to belief to have. Is it correct? You could ask me now and I might say, well, I have grandkids listening, so I might say that, yeah, it's still correct, but I think you get the point here, right? So we have to be really cognizant that those things happen, and those, if that belief is serving you, then great, keep that belief. But if it's not, if it's something just like this whole self-sabotage thing, if you get really close to to losing the weight you wanted, and then you find yourself gaining it back all the time, you have to really ask yourself, is what are my beliefs around that make me keep doing that, going back and forth? And it can be anything, not just weight. But if you find yourself getting close to something and then falling back all the time, 9 times out of 10, that's a belief that you have that's erroneous, that's not correct, that some well-meaning person taught you, and you can reprogram those beliefs. So, but the first step is just like anything, just like, being an alcoholic, you have to recognize it and then you have to do something about it.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that you're doing stuff like this. That there's, people, other people are working with therapists or working like someone with you who can point these things out. And
Yeah.
I'm my fortunate, my fiance, I'm fortunate she's good at pointing this out to me because I tell her, I don't want to be annoying about this. So make sure you call me out, which I don't even have to tell her that, she will. But cause I'm just so hyper aware of my speech now. And I'm like, oh man, I'd say that different. And when I say something now, I might say, I probably in the past would say something. I have a lot of, I'll be addicted to things a lot. I get addicted to things easily. And now sometimes I have a tendency to get addicted to things. And for me, that little nuance in, instead of taking that identity of someone who gets addicted to things, or I may have a tendency, or I did in the past, changes, that gives me so much more, you know, personal power to actually decide what I'm going to do and not do versus it's my DNA, it's my genetics, it's my
Right.
habits. I have all the addictive. I'm just an addict at heart, so I'll be addicted to things, and that's that. And it's just given me so much power. So now I'm to the extent where I try not to be annoying about it, but I know that notice those
Yeah.
little nuances in the speech, and it's for me, it's a day and night difference.
Yeah. One kind of trick around that I use to help my clients is that to recognize that, number one, that's fantastic, but then to change your wording around that. So I'll use an example for myself. I used to tell myself, because I thought I did, I used to tell myself I'm really terrible at remembering names, and I really dislike that about myself, because I want people to know that I value them, and I wanted to remember names. But part of the problem with like with dentistry is you see so many people, and I knew their face. I could tell you exactly what filling they had in which tooth, right? My wife always joked about that. If she needed to know who somebody was, I could look at an x-ray and say who that was. But so I used to say that, God, I'm terrible at remembering names. I'd say, Tim, I'm sorry, but I'm terrible at remembering names. So I recognized that, and I told myself, what if my story was, I'm not naturally good at remembering names, but I'm getting better every day. And when I had that little tiny shift in dialogue and started saying that to myself, you would be amazed at how well I was able to remember people's names. I didn't try any of these, there's techniques out there to remember people's names better and associate that name with pictures or whatever. I didn't do any of those other things, other than I said, you know what? I'm not naturally gifted at remembering people's names, but I'm getting better every day. Everything changed. And when I recognized that in myself and I started helping other people recognize that, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be that example, but it it tells you the power of the mind. And I write about in my book, 70% of men in particular, self-talk is negative. So if you're telling yourself things like you have an addictive behavior, like why would anybody listen to you? Because what do you know? If you tell yourself those things will become your reality. And so again, just like becoming an alcoholic, the first step is recognizing that you have that dialogue going on inside of your mind. And then if 70% of your self-talk is negative, like, oh, I suck at this, or I suck at remembering names, what is that going to do to your feeling of self-worth? And if you have 70% of your self-talk is negative, how are you going to love yourself? And if you don't love yourself, how are you going to have any left over to share and love other people that you care about? So there again, we're talking about this ripple effect. You got to get your own house in order, your own thoughts in order, for you to be able to reach down. There's it's inherent in us as human beings to want to reach out and help other people, especially people that are struggling. And so most people don't want, they don't want to hand out. They just want to hand up. And I feel that that's our responsibility. When we learn these things, when we start to develop this wisdom, that it's our responsibility. That's, again, one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I have the responsibility to share with other people what I've learned. Now they can take it and use it or not, but it's my responsibility to take those gifts that I've been given. I have a theory that the gifts that we're given, the things that we're naturally good at, are on loan from the universe, from God, whatever you want to call it. And if we're not using those parts, they're going to get recalled and given to somebody that will use them. And so I think it's really important that when we recognize that we have those gifts and we have those abilities, that we have to use them, share them. That's why we were given them.
I love that you have that awareness. And I know in your book, you said that about the way people think about aging. There's an example that I've just talking with my fiance recently about this. And like I said, I might just drive her crazy because, but
Probably.
I love talking about this stuff. And for the longest time, I think this is a good example, is when I eat spicy food, tastes good, I'd have a hell of a time going out. It was always hot and my body just couldn't, didn't break it down, didn't process it right. And I said to her, this was sort of an aha moment after, but I'm like, my body's gotten a lot better at processing hot stuff now when I eat it. And I said, you know what, I'm going to stick with that. I actually like that. As my body gets older, it gets more intelligent. And now it's really systematized everything. So now it really knows how to digest hot food. It does everything. So, easy in, easy out. As my body gets older, it gets more intelligent, it gets more efficient, and it does everything better. And I said to her, I'm flipping that script because I've heard, once you hit 30, this happens. And once you hit 40, and I'm like, once I hit 30, my body's got 30 years of
Yeah.
knowledge
Who
now.
says that?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
tell me it's all in my head. Great. Because it's working great for me. And I think that speaks to exactly what you're saying. And because you mentioned that study, I hadn't heard about that in a long time, when the men were isolated in the house.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that was a fascinating study. So a gal named Ellen Langer developed that study, and I think it was called a counterclockwise study. But what she did, and it was brilliant in my opinion, is they acquired a house and they decorated it like I think it was like the 1950s, and everything in there, black and white TVs, all that kind of stuff. And they took a group of men that were like 70 years old, and they had them come into this house, and they they were going to stay there for a week, but everything in the house was period specific to when they would have been, like 40 years old. And so these men were instructed they couldn't bring, no books, no magazines, no computers, nothing that they wouldn't have had in the 1950s. There was no pictures allowed in the house that would have been like of their family that wasn't period specific. So they tried to recreate what their life would have been like in the 1950s, when they were 20 years, 30 years younger. Okay. So everything was that way. And so this bus shows up and they got all these older men getting out there in their 70s at the time. And they're, some of them are, dragging their little suitcase, and some of them had walkers and whatever it might be. And they all shuffle into the house, and they paid attention to everything they did. They watched, they took pictures of them individually. They had video of them, how they walked, how they talked, how they conducted themselves. And they were immersed in this environment that made them feel like they were 20, 30 years younger. And after a week, then they interviewed everybody. The change was just remarkable. Most of them that had walkers and canes when they came into the house walked out of the house without them. Their whole attitude changed. They even had people after the study, independent people, look at before and after photos, not videos, but just before and after photos of the individuals, and rate which individual was younger, than the other one. In other words, what was the time frame on those two photos? Same individual, taken a week apart, and every one of the independent observers said that the person leaving the house was years younger than the person that entered the house. So there was all these things, all this proof that showed that just simply imagining and knowing that you're in a different environment, talking to people that were younger, acting younger, putting themselves back in that environment when they were younger, aged them backwards. And that's just, to me, that was just fascinating. It was so brilliantly done, because they thought about so many things. And you think about doing a study like that, it took a lot of setup to do that. But it was, and they even interviewed some of those guys, that were still alive 20 years later. And they all still had that same effect. They all thought younger. They all were thriving more. And just the fact, somebody walks in there with a walker, they have to have a walker for help, and they walk out on their own 2 feet it was a week later. That tells you the power of the mind. People talk about, they think about the placebo effect, right? The sugar pill, whatever you want to look at that as. And they look at that as like a fake pill or a fake phenomenon, when in reality, that's a real thing. It's not something fake. It's actually your body, because of your thoughts, healing itself. And I can speak to that personally. So a part of the book, one of the parts that I really didn't want to write about, but I found it necessary, was that where, I was diagnosed with this rare blood disorder where I had to retire from dentistry. And there again, you talk about these points in your life where your life shifts seismically, immediately. It took a long time I knew something was up, but none of the doctors could figure it out. I finally had to go to Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, because there was a specialist there from France that had because it's so rare, people don't know about it. But anyhow, finally got diagnosed, which was a huge relief, because it's like, I don't know what's going on. At least now you know who the enemy is. But when I walked into her office, she had my chart in front of her, and she just sat back in her chair, and she said, "Are you Dr. Tynes?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, I don't see people that have what you have that look like you. Tell me what you're doing." And so the biggest thing that I figured out was that I didn't own that disease. I wanted to know what it was, but once I knew what it was, uh, and I preach this a lot, and you really, people need to understand this, because I deal with a lot of people that have these diagnosis of whatever, it's a back injury, it's some blood disorder, whatever. You need to believe the diagnosis, but never believe the prognosis. Okay, it's really, let me say that again. Believe the diagnosis, but never believe the prognosis. Because if I would have, because the people that have what I have, most of the time can't even function on a daily basis. And most of them, their life is shortened significantly in quality of life and quantity of life. But I refuse. It's not about denial. It's just, I don't own that. I don't believe that has to be my prognosis. I know that's my diagnosis, but it doesn't. And so, because of the fact that, yeah, I was doing the things that are in my book, the principles. I was eating, according to the things that helped me prosper. I had my mind right. I'm a big proponent of things like meditation. Again, we can go down that whole rabbit hole about what that's about. But I was doing all those things right. But I think one of the things that helps me to this day to thrive is that I didn't own it. It's like, yeah, okay, that's what most people have. And I could have told myself, poor me. And here I worked so hard to become a dentist, and now my doctor's telling me I need to retire from that. And I could have said, poor me, about all that. Instead, it's like, okay, game on, let's go. And that allowed me the time to write books, to start my coaching business. And so I can speak to that directly. It's not what happens to us. And again, this is so important. It took me so many years to learn. It's not what happens to us. It's how we react to what happens to us. How did Jim Rohn put it? He said, it's not the blowing of the wind, it's the set of the sail. And what he meant by that was, we all have winds that blow on us. We all have things that happen to us out of the blue. And the crazy thing is, it's not the things we quote unquote worry about. It's the things that hit us in the side of the head we never saw coming. Those are the things that end up being the life-changing events. But again, it's not what happens to us in life. It's how we react to what happens to us. And I think that's so important for people to embrace, that we have that choice. And yeah, a lot of people have a lot of terrible things that happen to them in their life, but when you look at so many people, the adversity they've overcome, it's just a lot of that stuff will just bring you to tears. It's crazy, and it's so crazy to me too. Our society has gotten. I see you have the book up there, The Comfort Crisis. I love that book because our society's gotten so soft, and we do, complain about the goofiest things. And when you put it in perspective and you look at it, really, is it that important? It really can change everything. So again, I can speak to that personally because it's literally changed my life thinking that way. It's like, okay, it's not what I wanted, but how can I use this for good to, number one, learn the lesson myself, and then go out and teach other people how to handle those things that inevitably are going to happen because we're humans.
Yeah, I love that. I want to ask you a question about mentors. I'm gonna use the bathroom quick. Mentors specifically, when you were talking about your father, you reminded me of my father. He ran the dairy farm, took it over pretty young, and some of his friends I knew, they would say the same thing. Man, I was always so envious of your father because he could fix anything and he could do anything. And I got that mentality for myself. Very fortunate. So I would just figure things out. And I know you're talking about different mentors like Jim Rohn and Wayne Dyer. And we've also covered a lot of different, it's pretty wide, the whole human experience. But do you give a lot of that credit to your father for you to have, let's say, the open-mindedness to be able to, take in all these different ideas and use them and apply them, because I find it difficult. I'm 34 years old. And as I get older and I see it in other people, you get more calloused and you really don't want to take in these new ideas. And you seem to be intelligent, but very open to all the human possibilities and the things. And does a lot of that go back to your father and the way you were brought up and maybe those young years you spent around him?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, he was a fascinating guy. And the part of one of my regrets is, and I don't, it's nothing I could have done differently because I wasn't emotionally mature enough to understand it at the time, but I didn't understand how all the time he was teaching me lessons that I needed to learn in a timely manner and I'm not even sure he understood that. But the what's so amazing when I look back on it, his father was really hard on him. So as I said, they had the plumbing business. My dad was drafted, went to, was in the Korean War, came back home. He got back like at 5 in the afternoon. The next morning, somebody had a plumbing emergency. It was like 5 in the morning. My dad thought, well, I just got done with this 4-year stint. I'm going to take a couple weeks off. It was 4 or 5 the next morning. His dad came downstairs and said, Bob, there's this emergency. You got to go take. So he was like right back in it. And my granddad was of the type that, the employees, they can have the weekend off, but you're my son, so you go take care of this stuff. And so my grandfather didn't treat my dad very well, partially because his dad didn't treat him very. He wasn't abusive by any means, but he was strict and he wasn't outwardly loving. He loved my dad obviously, but he was like, he was like authoritative figure. Okay. And so, again, you don't understand all this stuff when you're a little kid, but I look back at it now and my dad was just the opposite. We, all we did was hunt and fish when I was a kid. I rarely played sports because the weekends were for my dad and I to go hunt and fish. And in fact, when I was a little kid, if I was over at the plumbing shop and the phone was ringing and nobody answered, I would answer it. Tynes Plumbing, Hunting and Fishing. How can I help you? And because I didn't know any, that's just what we did. That was our identity. And so, but I was always, even as a little kid, I was always invited first, right? He'd have all of his buddies that would want to go hunting with us because we had a great place to do it in the mountains. It's a whole nother story, but you'd have all these people that want to go with us, but I was always invited first. I was always taken care of first. And I appreciated it at the time that I was always included in these grown up games, if you will. But I appreciated that more as I got older. And so many of these lessons, like we built our own cabin when I was a kid. Again, he had no formal training, but we built a cabin from scratch. And I remember one time he's up on a ladder and he said, "Hey, get me that tri-square." And at the time, I'm a little kid. It's like, I'm looking around like, what the hell's a tri-square? He's like, give me that tri-square. Kind of got short with me, and I remember saying, "Geez, Dad, you act like I built a dozen cabins," and he just started cracking up laughing because that was one of those things that he just assumed that I could do. I was running a backhoe when I was 12 years old, because back then there wasn't all the rules and regulations that there are now. And he empowered me to do those things. So it really, it wasn't like, oh, you can't do that because you're this old or that old. He allowed me to make mistakes, but that served me so well in life, because one of my biggest things that helped me was that I did so many things because I didn't want to disappoint my dad. And that comes down to, when I was in college, there's all kinds of people doing drugs and that kind of stuff. And it's like, there's no way I would do that because my dad would be so disappointed if he found out that I did that, because I know that that's not right. And so there's all of these little lessons that I look back on that he didn't he didn't force them on me. He allowed me to learn them at my own pace when I was ready for them. And that was just so valuable. And I hope that I've done that same thing with my kids. Sometimes you have to let them make mistakes because they're never going to learn if you just tell them everything to do, just like your dad. I mean, they have to, I tell my clients, it's like, I'll give you the roots, but you need to grow some wings at some point, right? I'll teach you the principles. I'll help you. I'll help point out the things that maybe you don't recognize, but at some point you got to fly on your own. And so that was such a blessing for me. Number one, to just see how he conducted himself. Number two, there was, in his mind, which he instilled in my mind, there's nothing I can't do. If I need to figure something out, yeah, need help. And I mean, back in the day, we didn't have YouTube, right? So we'd have to get out the Chilton's manual to see how to do certain things, but you just figured it out. And that's so valuable later in life when you take those lessons and apply them to anything. And so, yeah, that mentorship, that's what's so elegant about it, is I didn't even know that I was being taught these things. And he was so, he wasn't easy on me by any means. If I screwed up, he would absolutely let me know. But he was kind. He was forthright. There was so much more money that he could have made in business if he'd have not taken as good a care of his employees, but he didn't care about money. Money was not a thing to him. He had enough. We always had enough, but it was not the driving force for the reason that he did things. It was you got to have enough, but he was so much more about taking care of people. And there again, I didn't really understand it at the time. It's like, oh, you could have, a nicer vehicle or whatever if you did this or that instead of giving so-and-so a Christmas bonus. I would think those things in my mind. I would observe those things. But even at that time, he was teaching me lessons about how to conduct myself and how to take care of other people, that from the outside looking in, he's just a regular guy. But he was so wise. And I just think that was a gift he had. That's another reason I wrote the book, is because I feel like there again, that was a gift I was given, and I need to share that with other people. That's why I was given that gift. It's not because I'm so great and I'm so smart. It's that I was given this gift and I need to share it with other people. So mentors like him, like people that I've never even met. One of the things I did when I got out of school is, there's the old saying about you become the sum total of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And I identified some people in my community that were what I would call self-made men. And I became, friends with them, acquaintances with them. And there again, there was no formal sitting down like, okay, you need to do this, this, and this. It was just by having coffee with them, observing them, listening to their stories, that I was able to gain so much knowledge. So I think that's another thing people can do, is just look around, find people that have done what you want to do. That's why it's so clear and important, Tim, that you are clear on what it is that you want. If you see somebody else that has what you want, number one, be really diligent about looking at the whole person, because especially with social media, there's so many people out there that aspire to be like certain individuals. But when you really look at their life, it's like you wouldn't trade your life for theirs any day. But if you look at people, there are people out there that are setting great examples. And if you can find those people and befriend them, a lot of times people look at these people as like, oh, they're here, they're up on this pedestal and I'm down here. But a lot of those people, they want to share their gifts. They want to reach down and help other people, because other people, there is no success on your own. We all have people that have helped us along the way. Like I had my dad and my wife Kelly and even my girls helped me so much to this day. I have people that have helped me, and that instills in me a desire to help other people the way I've been helped. So don't be afraid to reach out to these people that you look up to, because we're all humans. And if there's somebody that has done something that you would like to do, reach out to them. They would love to. People like that don't see you as competition. They see you as, wow, this is somebody that's really going somewhere and I want to help them get there. And a lot of people put these people on a pedestal, and they shouldn't. The other problem with following influencers that I've noted, especially with social media, is especially around health and wellness. Some of these, well-meaning people, sometimes they're not even well-meaning. They're out for a buck or whatever, but these people will put out something about health, wellness, fitness, nutrition, that this is how I got to this certain point and look at me how great I am. And so other people will buy their products, their things, their opportunities, and then they'll try them. So say you see something on social media, oh, that looks great. You buy that and you try it and it doesn't work for you. Who do you blame?
Yeah, I mean,
Remember 70% of
yeah,
that negative self-talk? You blame yourself. Oh, I suck. I have bad genetics. I don't have any discipline. You start going down that rabbit hole. There's something wrong with me, when in reality, that maybe did work for them, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. So instead of you saying, oh, well, that's, just that worked for them and not for me, not with my body type, my genetics, whatever it might be, it's not worth it to me. There's too much sacrifice to go there. Instead of blaming that person, we blame ourselves, and then we go down that rabbit hole. So be really careful about these influencers out there that are purporting to do a certain thing, and then you follow their protocol, you think, to the T, and it doesn't work for you. It's not your fault. You're not comparing apples to apples. So we have to be really careful with that.
to back up to what you were saying about mentors and your father, I know you were talking about a ripple effect earlier. I think that's a beautiful description of a ripple effect. What your father did for you, what you're now doing for your kids, your grandkids, everyone who's reading the book, for myself sitting here. And that's, in my optimistic mindset, just a beautiful example of what your father did, even if some of it he was doing intentionally and some he wasn't, but the ripple effect that that's caused on you, on me, on your family is like, that's what a beautiful way for people to think about their lives and what they're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know he's very proud of that. And I know he's still there, and we don't need to go down that whole rabbit hole about what happens when we're gone from this earth and all that. But I'll say this. I was raised Catholic, but we didn't go to church on a regular basis. I did little. My mom was more about that sort of thing, but I would kind of call myself like a buffet Catholic. Like there's parts of it that I would pick and choose that made sense to me, and other parts that didn't. But my dad, per se, he didn't go to church with us. It wasn't that he wasn't religious, but he didn't do that. It's just, my thought growing up, my belief was that you don't have to go to church to be with God. Okay. That we were closer to that in the mountains, but we didn't preach religion. We weren't, that wasn't a thing. We all had our beliefs, but this wasn't even something that was discussed. But one thing that really stood out to me, Tim, and I haven't discussed this with a lot of people, but when he ended up having a blood disorder at the end, which is what ended up taking his life, and we were sitting around in the hospital when he was we knew he only had a few days left, that we just got the diagnosis. And I was sitting there, I was pretty emotional, because it's like, he was my best friend. He wasn't just my dad. And, I just said, so, is there anything that you want me to know? Anything that you would like for me to be doing differently? Cause I really honored him, and I wanted to be sure, if he was going to be gone, that, I was doing everything that he wanted me to do. And here, he knows that he's only got a day or two left. And I'm thinking in my mind, he's going to be really emotional and think about, all these things in his life, and he's going to be kind of sad and all that kind of stuff. And, uh, he looked over at me, and he's like, what's your problem? And I looked at him and I said, well, Dad, he said, you're not just my dad, you're my best friend. And we did everything together. And, he said, no, Kelly's your best friend, you know, which him and my wife, Kelly, got along amazingly well. But he's like, look at me like, what's your problem? Kelly's your best friend. And he's like, oh, what's on Fox News? I mean, it's like totally cool, calm, and collected about that. And what I realized at that moment, and he had alluded to this when I was a kid, but again, we didn't talk about this stuff, but he had a near-death experience. And we didn't even talk about exactly what that was, but he'd alluded to the fact that he had this near-death experience, and he'd kind of seen the light and the whole thing that people describe and all of that. And I look back at it now, and I know for a fact that's why he was so peaceful. He knew what was coming next. And I talk about that in my book, that whole memento mori, that whole philosophy about not fearing death and embracing death. And, I joke about it, that just being born is a terminal illness, right? But I think there again, he's on his deathbed, and he taught me a lesson about not just living, but about dying, and how to embrace that and not be scared about that. And so, yeah, those types of experiences, those mentors that we have in our life, and again, a lot of this stuff, Tim, you don't realize it now, or even a year from now, but you're going to look back 5 years from now and go, wow, that's why that person came into my life at that particular time. That's why I was introduced to my fiance. That's, I call them synchronicities, these little things that show up that most of us are stumbling around through life. We don't even know that they're happening. And when we look back on them, they're like, oh, that's what, that the old thank God for unanswered prayers thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's so true.
And yeah, I just want to say it too. You made me think when you were talking about your father, and that's very. It seems like as many of the things he intentionally taught you, the things he unintentionally was teaching you, were just very almost synchronistic. When you're talking about, because I was saying how I think about my father so much and everything he do, but my mother, very incredible woman, and she was in my life a lot more as I got older, because my father passed pretty young, and she said the same thing. She said, I almost feel bad. Like, I wondered, was I too hard on you kids? She said, but I just wanted you guys, to figure things out and be able to figure things out. So she wasn't trying to be hard on us, but she was also like, hey, I don't want to just hand you this stuff. I want you to work for it. And it's, to my mother and my father, I'm very grateful for. And it just seems very cool what your father's done for you, and where that gets us, is those mentors and those people, whether we look at them as mentors then or in hindsight, it's very cool.
Yeah. And we have to recognize those gifts that we're given, and we have to share them with other people. That's why we're given those opportunities and those things in our life, is because we're being taught a lesson so we can help other people when they're going through that same situation. But we have to recognize that, and we have to know our worth. We have to understand how important we all are as individuals. We all have a role to play, and we all need to step up and play that role and be the best version of ourselves. We can't play small. We only got one shot at this. And A lot of people are just playing it safe. They're afraid, and I understand that. But the more you can be around people that lift you up and people that take care of you, and the more you can recognize that things are happening to you for a reason, good, what you might consider quote unquote good or bad, they're happening for a reason. And again, the older you get, the more opportunity you have to look back and go, wow, that's why that happened. At the time, it seemed catastrophic. But thank God that did happen, because that led to this or that. It's, the more we live, the more we get to experience that.
Yeah, it's very cool, and it makes a lot more sense in hindsight than it does some of the stuff
Mhm.
when you're going through it.
For sure.
So when you're not doing this and working with people and making everyone's life better, what do you? I know you have horses. You're in the backcountry a lot. You're hunting a lot. You're an outfitter. You've got an outfitter's license.
No, I'm not an outfitter. I have a guide's license, but I'm not an outfitter. You know, I've, I always have, I just have an affinity for the outdoors. I love the outdoors. It can teach us so many things about ourselves. And I just feel lit up I mean, we all have things that light us up again, if we pay attention to those things. And there's something about the outdoors. There's another book about the secret life of trees. And it's fascinating to think about. There's reasons that we feel as human beings good outdoors. There's things in the air. There's all this stuff going on biologically and biochemically in our bodies when we're in the outdoors. And that's another issue with people, especially young men that grow up in the cities. They don't have exposure to that. But we all feel it. It's innate in our DNA. But even more so in me. So there's nothing. I mean, I've had the opportunity to hunt all over the world, to fish all over the world. There is nothing that lights me up more than to take my horses in the mountains in Montana and just ride around. And I love hunting elk. There's something about elk. They're so majestic. They're so amazing. Every time I see one to this day. I was out last weekend. So we have a black powder season here in Montana. That's a week long. It has to be traditional stuff, lead balls, open sights, black powder, flintlock, nothing mechanical, no scopes. And I'd already gotten a nice bull earlier in the year with my rifle, but I went out last weekend just because the season was open. And so it's like I couldn't not go out, right? And so went out by myself. Kids couldn't go. Horses are already back home here in Bozeman. River's iced up, but it's like I can get there. I can walk there. So again, that's one of the reasons I'm so adamant about staying physically fit, so I can go do these things. And I'm going to do those same things with my grandsons when they're old enough. But I go up there on the mountain. I'm walking along, and I look up, and here 80 yards away is this really nice 6-point bull standing broadside. I had no idea I was there. I had already shot my elk. So I had the opportunity to shoot a big buck mule deer, but it wasn't right at the time where I was at. And so here I am with this loaded weapon that was legal to shoot this bull, but I'd already got my bull. So I dumped the powder out quietly, and I pulled the trigger on him, counting coup like the Indians used to do. And so I literally laughed to myself, because it was just as good as getting the animal, but I got to experience all that stuff out, but I didn't have to pack him out on my own. And so that kind of stuff just lights me up. I just love being able to do that. And it just, and that's there again, I was given that opportunity. We have an amazing place to go do that kind of stuff. And now it's my obligation to show my kids and my grandkids how to conduct themselves. We still have we could have all the electricity and all that kind of stuff we wanted. It's still off the grid. I have solar. We've got a hand water pump. There's an outhouse. Yeah, I could put in a bathroom. I could put in all this other stuff, but my grandkids need to understand that they can survive quite comfortably in that environment on their own. And so That's the kind of stuff that lights me up. I love there's an old saying, there's nothing better for the inside of a man than the outside of a horse. And I truly believe horses are amazing. Same with dogs. I love all animals. So animals, outdoors, hunting, fishing. It's not about killing the animal like I talk in my book. I do think that's some of the best protein by far that you can get. That's a whole nother story, but it's the experience of that and being able to do that. It will light you up and feel alive. And I would encourage people to find out whatever that is for them in their life. We're all different, right? That's what makes it so beautiful. But find something that just, it's in your gut. Find something that lights you up and do that.
Yeah, I'm with you too, and we could go down a whole another rabbit hole, which we probably already did too much. But me and my fiance have two horses. We always had one horse on the farm growing up, but I wasn't as much into horses as my sisters were. And we take them out on the trails now. There's nothing that does it for me like that does.
Yeah.
Just being with the horses and being in the mountains here in Montana is,
Yeah,
to me, it's second to none. It's
absolutely. So whatever that is that lights you up, you need to do that. You need to pursue that, and you need to share it with others.
hell yeah. Where can people find you if they want to read your book or keep keep up with what you're doing? Are you doing any? I know you said you speak places. Do you do any speaking or anything like that around
Yeah,
here?
so I do different things in different venues. I was recently invited to speak at the annual event next year for the Montana Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. So I was really honored that that they would include me in that, because there's so much rich history around that, and I also think there's so much um, clarity that needs to be around these people that are putting their life on the line. Uh, it's crazy. Those people that do those peace officer type things do not do it for the money. There is way better ways to make money. They do it because it's in their heart, because they care about people. Because you look at, for all of these people that say defund the police and all this other BS, it should be mandatory that you go do a ride along with them one night, just one night. Just go ride along with them and see the kind of crap that they put up with, and the things that the fires they have to put out, the literal fires, between family members, between, the firefighters. Ride around with them one night, and you will have a totally different perspective. So I was really honored to be invited to talk to them, and just all of those types of venues. I speak at dental conferences about this same type of thing. So yeah, again, it's my privilege to be able to take this information that I've been so blessed with and share it with other people. So yeah, the books, I got all my social media stuff on there, at Gene Tuff on Gmail, or on Instagram. It's Gene Tuff. So my name, Gene, Tuff, Tough, at gmail.com. Reach out to me there. If anybody would like me to come speak to their group, I love doing that. It's one of the great honors of my life. So I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing here, Tim. I can't wait to see the next iteration, that next pivot, that next door that you walk through. And I'm always here to help anyone in the community, yourself included, and whatever I can do to help make lives better. That's my purpose.
Yeah, I appreciate everything you're doing. I'll put links to everything in the description for this, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you and hear what you do. And yeah, thank you from
Awesome.
me. Yeah, thanks, sir.
Yep. Take care.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening, folks. You can find the full blog post for every episode, along with key takeaways and links, at mountain-mule.com. If you haven't yet, consider following the show. That one small action helps these Montana businesses get seen, grow, and thrive, and it helps this podcast keep going too. If you know a business that would be a good fit for the show, we'd love to hear from you. Just reach out through the website or social. Thank you for supporting these Montana businesses. See you on the next show.